Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we're shaping the future of floriculture, one conversation at a time. We talk with the growers, leaders, and innovators shaping tomorrow's greenhouse industry today. From market trends, next generation plants, and innovative production, to the challenges and breakthroughs redefining what it means to grow. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. Let's dig into what's next together. One of the many panel discussions that took place at Cultivate last month revolved around the topic of succession planning. I was in attendance for that discussion, and it was honestly so compelling that I left the room with a long list of questions that remained unanswered. So I invited the panelists to join me on the podcast for a follow-up discussion. In this episode, I'm joined by Karin Walters of Walters Gardens, Keith Berns of Berns Garden Center and Landscaping, and Robert Saunders of Saunders Brothers. We talked about everything from how the business transition conversation should start to how each of them are running the business different from previous generations. Here's our conversation. So I want to thank all three of you for being part of the discussion today. As we were talking about, this is kind of a follow-up to one of the panel discussions that took place at Cultivate around succession planning, and in particular, success stories and I think lessons learned that come from that process. So it was a great conversation. I wanted to have a follow-up discussion with all of you who were involved in that panel. So before we get to that point, though, I do want to just quickly walk through each of your current roles at your companies, and then how you became part of the current generation of ownership. So Robert, I want to start with you for that question.
So, excuse me, I'm Robert Saunders, the CEO at Saunders Brothers. Third generation here. We've got fourth generation who's involved in the business also right now. The nursery started on second generation. Before that was my grandfather, another. But so I am part of one of four in generation three who is passing it on now. So I was part of generation two to generation three, that transition. Now I'm part of the 3 to 4 passing of the torch.
Okay. Karin, what about you?
Yes, my name is Karin Walters. I am CEO of Walters Gardens. I am third generation. It actually started with my great grandma, but then it changed hands to her son-in-law, Dennis Walters. So you could argue that I'm fourth generation.
Okay.
How I became part of the current generation of ownership, it was when I graduated college in 2008, and there really wasn't great job prospects during the Great Recession. And it just so happened that there was someone retiring at the time. So my dad asked me to come work for the company with no
Okay.
real plan for advancement.
Okay. All right. Keith, what about you? Your role, and then how you're a part of the current generation of ownership.
Yeah, so my name's Keith Berns. I'm the president at Berns Garden Center and Landscaping here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been with the company now since 2014, and I'm third generation. So we're celebrating our 70th anniversary this year, founded in 1956 by my grandmother and grandfather.
Okay. One of the things I want to start off with is the conversation about the transition process. Sometimes I think that can be the most challenging part, is just how to get that conversation started. And I remember someone at the panel saying, there was a question of, well, I don't necessarily want to ask about it, but I know that, my parents or whoever are not going to come to me and ask about it at the same time. So in your cases, how did the conversation about a transition in ownership start? Karin, I'll start with you for that question.
It started with my current generation wondering whether my dad's generation had a plan, and the answer was he did not.
Okay.
It was about 10 years ago. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2015 or 2016. My dad was in his 60s, and there wasn't a clearly communicated plan. I was working at the company at the time, but I didn't have the um, current role that I had, so there was just some questions on direction. So if anything, the next gen me forced the conversation, or me and my sister and cousin.
Okay. I remember you saying that was a kind of challenging when you guys started that process, but it sounds like it's worked out pretty nicely to this point.
Sure.
Keith, what about you? So how did that conversation start on your end?
Yeah, so I was working outside of Columbus at a young plant producer as a grower, and had been through a few different roles there and felt pretty confident in my skills just as a contributor
Okay.
to the team. When I knew I was going to make a change from that company, but I didn't know exactly where. So before I started looking actively, I came back home and I had some conversations and said, I'm definitely going to make a move, and if you think this is a good fit. So coming out of that and walking the crops and talking about the business with the second generation, who were the owners at the time, I felt pretty confident that I was going to be able to contribute right away.
Okay.
That I had skills and experience that maybe the company was lacking, and I felt pretty confident I could come back and make that impact, and sort of pitched them on that, and they hired me. I mean, it was actually pretty interesting. Most of the conversations, because this was 2014, and at
Yeah.
that time, the company was coming out of, still trying to work its way out of that '08 recession time. And really most of the conversations were around, are you sure you want to do this? There's no guarantee that you're going to be an owner.
Yeah.
You may just be here with a job. But we went forward with it and it's worked out.
Well, and that no guarantee is something I want to talk about here at some point too, as we get through the discussion here, as well as the skills and experience you mentioned. Before we get to that, Robert, in your case, how did the conversation start?
So I don't think there was ever a conversation really that started. When I came back in the late '80s, the business, my dad, he wanted to grow the business. And so me and three of my brothers came back, and the business was at a point where I don't think, and this is kind of speculating as to where what he saw, because he's not here to tell us that story, but he didn't, I don't think he saw the ability to highly compensate us and to
Mhm.
so he started fairly soon after we came back, he started giving us stock in the company. And that allowed us it was a peace of mind. It was part of mine, and we wanted to grow. And he was really good about continuing to gift stock to us, um, and on an annual basis over about 20 years. And slowly, I got ownership as part of my compensation. Again, very being moderately compensated, but pretty soon I realized I owned a big piece of this company, and we were able to start getting distributions out there with it. And so that is how I got. And then I and my brothers have saw that model and have started um, gifting stock. Was several years ago to our children who've been here 10, 12 years right now in the company.
Okay.
But we've got some bigger plans as to how to move it on, some trading and of assets and stuff to quickly, because the company is so different from what it was. It's going to take. We don't want the transition to throw heavy burden on the company.
Yeah. Well, and I know that there's so many layers of how Saunders operates, and just from my prior experience before, working on Greenhouse Grower as a brand, I was focused more on the outdoor fruit and vegetable industry. So I got to know, Bennett and his team on the apple and orchard side of the mix. So, you said something really interesting during the discussion at Cultivate, and that was, and Keith, you alluded to there a second ago as well, that you know when you each came back, there was not a guarantee that number one, you're going to become the next part of ownership, but you're going to even have a role there. You all had to go through the same process as anybody else. And I know it sounds like, and I know you mentioned this, Robert, that that's kind of a key component for anybody moving forward for the company. So do you think that helped you as you made that progression into where you are now?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does, because we started, when I come back, the company was about maybe a tenth the size it is right now. And so I was doing everything. I was doing anything and everything. You were on the potting crew, or you were on the building greenhouses or whatever. And then slowly we each found our own niche. And you know, I started engineering, and then I became salesman, and then I worked my way on through. And I think you learn so much of it. And to me, that's one of the challenges as we go to the next generation. So much tribal knowledge is in that 40 years of doing it and how we could pass that on. But yeah, if there was some lean times in there where you wondered what was going to happen. But having family together made it you f- you felt like everybody was covering each other's back on it.
Okay. Okay. I want to go back to the skills and experience comment that Keith that you made there a second ago, and I'll start with you for this question. So, again, all of you gained experience in fields outside of horticulture before you came back to the business. So, what types of skills do you think that you learned during that time away that you've been able to since then apply to running your own business today?
Um, so I've been in horticulture my whole life. So I didn't go outside of horticulture, but I was outside of Berns.
Sure.
And I don't know if I would necessarily call this a skill, but but every position I've had at every company I've had, they were all small businesses. Everybody in those organizations was stretched thin, and I learned very quickly to be scrappy, to do every job and any job, and figure out how to do it and do it efficiently and fast and with quality. Um, and so I sort of feel like, going back to when I first graduated college, there's like these 4-year cycles.
Yeah.
I did a few years at that original company, and then I came back. I was a grower, and for about 4 years, got that division. I felt comfortable. Trained somebody else, moved on. Ran the retail garden centers for 4 years. Trained somebody else, moved into this more executive level leadership role, and
Sure.
now I'm about 4 years into that. So. I don't know. I guess that skill of, you got to go find your own resources and learn how to do this and make it happen. I wasn't formally trained on how to do any of these things.
Okay.
Um,
I know that you know lack of specific formal training in some of these areas. I know, Karen, that came up during your part of the conversation as well. That you in your role now, and you even mentioned this during the presentation, that you don't necessarily have to have that full-on horticulture background and experience, but there's so many other things that you can bring to what you're doing. So, what kind of skills did you pick up during your time away that you were able to bring back to Walters?
Sure. And just as a correction,
Yeah.
I started working at Walter's Gardens straight out of college. So I did
Okay.
not have the luxury. I don't know, luxury is not maybe
Mhm.
the word for it, but the opportunity to work elsewhere. At the time when I was in my 20s, I didn't really want to work elsewhere, but I think it would have been like I think what you probably heard during the session is I would have found it beneficial to work elsewhere. So
Okay.
there are things that I wish, like not having the horticulture degree, like it would have been interesting to have that if I had thought about it at the time, but
Yeah.
that probably you would need to know what you wanted to do with your life when you were like 23 or something, which I did not. And maybe guided a little bit more like, there are some next gen kids going to school for horticulture because their parents encouraged them to do so.
Mhm.
My parents were more like, you go they had no conversations about, of like, maybe you should join the business and then help take over next generation. Like, there's
Right.
0 promises, there wasn't any conversations about that. Okay,
Okay.
so going back to your question, like, what skills did I kind of pick up along the way? Well, in I felt woefully unprepared even going into the request to have let's say, a succession plan from my dad. So,
Okay.
like, not having, like, a business degree or, like, what felt like leadership training, even though, like, the more I talk to people, the more people a lot of people do not feel like they have enough leadership training even when they're thrust into leadership roles.
Sure.
I think the people that you think are naturally good leaders, yes, that may be true, but they also, kind of agreeing with Keith, kind of train themselves to do that and kind of, learn by fire, if you
Yeah.
will. So the things that we've done, and when I say we, the third generation here at Walters Gardens, when we're teaching ourselves how to run a company, um, learning how to read, I said this during the session, so I'm repeating it here.
Mhm.
Learning how to read the financial statements
Yeah.
was a multi-year process because I didn't have any accounting background, and now I can kind of glance at it and kinda know what's going on, but,
Yeah.
when I am explaining it to someone who doesn't know, it's more obvious that I have learned how to do that. So if you did not have since I didn't have an accounting degree, learning how to read, a profit and loss statement or, income statement or balance sheet and all that stuff. And then for leadership training, what we had heard from a few people, and we got referred to Charlie Hall's Eagle, which is
Yeah.
the Executive Academy of Growth and Leadership. I would have to look that up. It's mainly referred to as Eagle
Right.
with the intention of getting leadership skills. And yes, they do that, but it's also, you can attend classes at Cultivate, but it's a matter of taking what you learn and actually doing it and, actually having direct reports and dealing with it on the job is probably where most of that leadership training comes from.
Okay. Well, and I know, I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, that ability to, self motivate yourself to become a leader, I think is almost as important as anything else in this whole process. The fact that, as you said, you don't necessarily come with, experience in some areas, but if you can, motivate yourself to learn more about anything that you have to do to be in that role, that's
Yeah.
critical to that process.
And I'm definitely not a natural leader. I I own that completely. So I think if anything, it makes me more conscientious about my behavior, and I've made some mistakes along the way, but like you learn from those mistakes and you do better.
Okay. And I definitely want to ask about that at some point, how
Oh
how
boy.
things change in terms of leadership roles. Before we get to that though, so Robert O'Neill, and I know you were mentioned during the panel that, you know, you were left thinking that you were going to be an engineer and run a factory. And I know you meant it just, you made a comment that you almost are now, but it's a plant factory more than anything else. But so what are some of the skills that you brought back to Saunders Brothers?
Yeah, I left here to go to college and said this is absolutely the last place on this earth that I will live and make a living and grow up. And somehow 4 years later, I was back here with it with an engineering degree. So and I would go back to what Karen said that it there's so many my engineering degree really made a difference early. Um, and my engineering degree now because again, as I said, I run a factory. That's all we do is we run a factory now, but missing that financial side and that leadership side. And Charlie Hall's Eagle program and Kelly too. I can't give it all to Charlie, but the Eagle program has made a huge difference in me being able to understand how to lead and how to read and that, but also bringing in the skill sets of other people willing to realize I don't know how to do this. I've got to get somebody who can be beside me that can read those financials and help analyze those financials. Um, I'm good at processes. That's my candy land is making processes, but helping understand the financial side of it is the piece that I like. But on the so that the so I came straight back in my other two of the three brothers came straight back into the business. Again, a very different business. But our next generation, we have said they absolutely have to go work for 3 years somewhere else, a minimum of 3 years, no matter what position. If you want to be a truck driver or you want to be a salesperson no matter what level you want to be, you've got to work somewhere else for 3 years. And it's made a big difference. And two of my children had come back, but during their 3 year stints elsewhere, it was really interesting from what they had learned in high school and all in summers working here. They would call me and say, "Hey, I work for this nursery and they're doing this. Why do you not do that or whatnot?" And those things are pretty cool. And then develop the relationships outside of who we are and bring something new and but don't just come in and do what we're doing. Come in and tell us how to do something better.
Sure.
Um, so
Okay. Um, so and I'll start with you, Robert. So I will stay on you for this next question. So again, going back to the actual process of transitioning the business to the next generation. So, what are what do you think are the biggest lessons that you learned during that process? And to tie into that, what kind of advice would you offer another person, another company who is looking to go through that process right now?
um, just do everything you possibly can to create success. I think everybody wants these things to work for another generation, and whatever you can do to set them up for success. The easy thing is to take your money and run,
Sure.
um, but that's not what I don't think any of us want to do. But figuring out what processes do I need to change, what do I need to do, and and bringing the right people in. We brought a consultant in to help us transition this thing, and he's making us have those hard conversations. Put dates on the calendar and show your cards. The easy thing. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do, but
Yeah.
but he's making us show our cards, and 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 how we're going to do it, and put and again and get what he wants it to happen. He wants us to see success and watch success happen versus just handing the keys and walking out the door.
Sure.
Um, so just set them up for success, because there's no better joy to me than watching them succeed at something.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith, what about you? Any lessons or advice that you would have for somebody who's doing the same process?
The first thing is you've got to know and understand the business. And I know in small business, those strategic plans and all those things, they may not be outlined very well. It's not going to be, in my case, it wasn't handed to me. This is how our business runs. But um, you've got to have a feel for how the business really runs, how it generates cash. You got to understand those things. You got to understand the financials. So you really can't run a business. You don't need an accounting degree, but you've got to be able to read and understand financial statements. And it's all three of them. You've got to be able to understand, how to generate profit through an income statement, how to manage balance sheet, and you've got to make sure you don't run out of cash. Those cash flow statements, you got to be able to do all those things really well.
Yeah.
Understanding when you actually get into the uh, you know purchasing the business or being prepared to get the gifts of stock, understanding what the previous generation wants, how they view their exit, where they are on their retirement plan, both financially and what they're going to do with their lives.
Okay.
You have to know whether they're going to make an exit or if they're not, if they have the financial capacity to exit, and whether that's formally through consultants, or if that's just asking the questions at lunch or breakfast, or in the office. But you have to have that information about what they want, or you're not going to be able to make a deal.
Mhm.
So you got to gather all that advice and you have to personally be ready to take over the company. And you have to know when it's time that you would outperform the current generation or previous generation.
Sure.
And then what it would take to get them out. And then the last thing is you've got to make an offer. So at least in my case, it was not presented on a silver platter like, hey, here's how we want this to go, and here's what it's going to take financially, and here's our expectations of you. You know, there was very little action taken. There was a lot of participation, which I was blessed to have. So
Mhm.
they were very engaged and active, but not. They did not lead the process very much. The next generation, my generation, really had to push everything through, and then at the end, we had to make an offer. And
Yeah.
so.
Well, and to your point about, who takes ownership of that process, I'll turn over to Karen to get your advice on any lessons or advice. I found it very interesting that, I mean, you were very frank during the discussion, about the fact that, there can be challenges along the way that you have to be able to work through to make this process work. So with that being said, what were some of the key lessons or advice that you can share with others?
Yeah. So I've hinted toward this kind of in my earliest statements. Clearly, it was the third generation, so my generation, that was wanting a plan,
Yeah.
and my dad's generation, second gen, really had no motivation to work on this at all. In fact, when we pushed to have the conversations, he would straight refuse to have them.
Mhm.
Um, I talked about this during the call, so I can repeat it here. I don't think it's a secret, even though I maybe was a little bit more candid than I should have been during the panel at Cultivate. I talked about a situation where we had heard through, we're just picking the brains of all these next gen people when in the industry. So that
Yeah.
usually like that a lot of people are in the same boat. There's like the frustrated kids waiting impatiently for the parents or uncles, aunts, whatever relatives to hand off the business or at least relinquish some sort of the iron grip of that they have. And someone had recommended a company which I still did not look up since Cultivate. So we
Yeah.
had reached out to, but I feel like it was a company that specializes in consultants for succession planning. I just don't remember what it was. We didn't end up using them, so that's why I don't remember who they
Sure.
were. But it was recommended to us by another company in the industry, and I don't remember who that was either.
Hmm.
So we had reached out and contacted a person and had a call without my dad. With this person, we're like, all right, let's try to. And he did not know we were doing this, so that
Yeah.
was a misstep there. Um, we've kind of sprung it on him. If anyone knows my dad, surprises are not his thing. And honestly, same. I don't handle surprises well. So we sprung on like, hey, we're very like we want to keep moving with like actually talking about like what will happen after you retire. One, he
Yeah.
didn't want to think about retirement, so that was part of the problem. And like it's like, would you be willing to have a call with this person? Or meet with this person? And that was a very that was a misstep. That was a lesson learned. Like, he wasn't
Okay.
ready, and we were trying to force his hand, and at that point, it did not work. So,
Okay.
I think I mentioned it was probably, like, a year or 2 of cooling off before we felt frustrated by and again, my dad was in his 60s at the time, the lack of progress and kind of you saying, like, "We have to do something." You refuse to meet with this person, like, we can't do this anymore. And that
Yeah.
is when my dad said, well, actually, I was on the board with this guy that used to be the HR director of a company. He's now doing consultant work. I think I trust him. I know who he is. Maybe
Yeah.
he could help us with this process. So then he chose and reached out to the person to help us with our succession planning and transition.
Yeah.
And that's who we ended up with. And he was the one that was instrumental in guiding my dad to start, like, actually letting go. You'll have a lot of, advice from people, like, practically how to, like, do ownership, but the actual of, like, letting go of your current tasks, there's not a lot of advice out there for that.
Right.
There's people that can do it naturally, and they don't need anyone to help them let go, but, we needed a consultant to have us kinda lay out what the responsibilities he'd had to let go, who took them over, and when it had to happen.
Well, and I think those conversations that tie back to the numbers or the processes, that's a little more concrete, I think. But to your point, those emotional conversations are a totally different matter, and you can't look up in a book or find online just how to do that the right way. That's a whole separate way of thinking that you have to look at. So,
Mhm.
um, staying with you, Karen, for this next question. So, now that you're in this role now, how are you doing things differently in terms of managing the business that the previous generation, or not that they didn't do, but they're different from what the previous generation had been doing?
Yeah, well, I think even going into like wanting to take over for my dad, we knew that it couldn't all be one person. So when my dad took over from my grandpa, so his dad, it was a much smaller business. He kind of bounced around in different roles and kind of filled in as needed. So he had experience in a lot of areas and just kind of had all that tribal knowledge. Whereas like if any of us, I mean, we could have done that, but like
Right.
the his role with, like, knowing everything was just gonna be impossible, so we knew we had to divide and conquer and have it not all be one person. So, for example, my cousin Ryan does operations, my sister Krista does sales and marketing, and then I manage more of the, product development, supply chain type of situation.
Yeah.
And like my dad did all of those things.
Hmm.
Over the years, he'd hire people to help him, and those people did their roles. So yeah, it was just not going to be the same. Um, Additionally, so my dad is, a previous generation, and there is a certain type of style of leadership where you just like are that charismatic leader and everyone just does what you want without really questioning it. And I don't
Yeah.
think that was necessarily wrong at the time. That was something that made the business successful. Like he had this vision for the company, he grew the company, he tripled the size of the business. So that
Yeah.
was all successful. But even with, so I'm a millennial, like millennials and Gen Z, like you can't just tell them what to do without like, motivating them or, there was going to have to be a different style of leadership.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there's a lot of time with like, having people come to the conclusions that you knew was from the beginning what you wanted them to do, but you can't tell them to do that at the
Right.
beginning. So it takes a lot longer, but you can tell them what to do, but they might not want to do it if they don't agree with you. So
Yeah.
then it's better in the long run if you spend that time. So anyway, like my dad does that a little bit, but there's a lot more of that with our style of leadership.
Okay. And to your point there too about not having to be a one-person show. I remember, Jeremy Deppie, who was also on the panel with the three of you, or couldn't join us today for scheduling conflict purposes, but he kind of said the same thing where, he's trying to use this as an opportunity to, run the business at a higher level and delegate some of the
Yeah.
other, more day-to-day tasks to others on his team. So I think that's really important. Keith, from your perspective, how are you doing things differently at Berns?
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting when we did the transition in 2022. So it was like we worked on this deal. We kind of came to terms with what it was going to be in November 2021. Um, it was effective January 1st, 2022.
Mm,
And we came back from the kind of Christmas, New Year's break, made an announcement to the team, and two of the four previous owners, um, pretty well retired. Or they definitely stepped back from their day to day role, and they I think they stayed on at some capacity for a year.
okay.
And then two of the other ones, actually they're still with the company, but they all stepped away from the leadership ownership roles that day, and we made the announcement to the team. And then we sort of reset the org chart. So it was a one day it's this, the next day it's that.
Yeah.
Um, Once that happened, we went from four to two, and we basically hired a leadership team around us. So we have a landscape division, we have a growing division, greenhouse division, and two retail locations. So we hired HR, finance, level managers. These are salaries that Burns had never had outside of a family member ever.
Yeah.
So that capacity for salaries with the exit of them allowed us to build more of a professional level team around us. Um, so, we kind of created these director roles for my partner, Scott, and myself, um, where we run the company, but every division really has its own manager who's responsible for the P&L and results and the culture and everything else with each one of those teams. So the silos at Burns have really broken down.
Okay.
I think in a very positive way. So the entire way that we create our strategy and then execute against it and hold each other accountable, all those things have been built from January 1st, 2022.
Sure.
The other thing that's a big change is for many years prior to that, and we all know that this industry isn't, I mean, maybe it is, and we're just doing it wrong. But this industry isn't well known for being, producing huge amounts of cash all the time. But the previous generation was absolutely in harvest mode. They saw that their time was coming sort of close to an end, and they were very conservative about spending and reinvestment.
Yeah.
And if you hire that great team around you, you cannot starve them of capital. So we are doing everything we can to put all the resources behind all those people so that they can go execute in a positive way. We got an amazing team, and the customers, they're reacting to that. So
Yeah.
it's been, that where you direct your capital really matters, and I think we're certainly doing differently than they did. Yes. But in a thoughtful, conservative, I don't want to say frugal, but maybe frugal, managing the balance sheet kind of a way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we could obviously have a whole different conversation about that, the ability to budget and manage for the short term versus the long term as well. I mean, that's a challenge that everybody in this industry is facing, I think. So, um, Robert, on your end, so how are you doing things differently at Saunders Brothers today?
So, to go back 20 years or so ago, it was totally a family operated business. Everything, nothing happened outside of the family unit. All the meetings were just the four brothers, my sister-in-law, and my dad. And you never let any of the financials or anything, it was like, the tax accountant's got to swear to total secrecy, et cetera, et cetera. And then, we brought in after a few just different conferences at Cultivate and and some of those, we realized we had to figure out this transition. We brought in two consultants. Both of them said, if you continue the way you're going, this thing will not succeed.
Okay.
So we hired one of them to create a, they said we had to, both said we had to create a hierarchical structure where you had functioning and there was somebody at the top of it, and then you had the functioning thing. So um, and so what we did, we ended up creating an executive leadership team to manage, and we've opened up ourselves. So in that management, we got sales, operations, finance, and human resources, and then below there too. But we're opening up ourselves to our staff to understand financials and to understand, before they would grow a plan in it because they love that plan. Now we're
Yeah.
showing them the numbers and make decisions based on the numbers and all, which again, everything used to be just held so tightly. And now we're sharing, there's probably 25 people who will see some level of the P&L to understand it. Certainly within their department, every grower's got to understand what's going on. So much wider. And then we're trying to train our leaders. It kind of go back to what Karin said. That my dad was in that generation where it's just like, just get up and go to work and shut up. And it's what you're supposed to do. But now with this new generation, they are really benefiting from leadership training, bringing in people to do one-on-one training and to build them. I was scared to death because I was like, I'm going to expose my talent and somebody's going to cherry pick them. But we've got to go and allow that to build them up as better people. You have an incredible person who can grow the crap out of plants, but they can't communicate or anything. So we're trying to build them up to be better leaders in what we do. So
Oh, sure.
and move people vertically through the company. So
Well, and for those listening to this, I know Robert was on our webinar call just prior to this, where you talked about a lot of these same things that we're talking about now, that, how to effectively, train your team and use new tools and have your team, you really know the ins and outs of, not just the product that they're selling, that they're growing, but the costs involved to it as well, and how to set the right pricing based on that. So I think that's really important. Um, Last question I have for each of you, and I'll start with you, Robert, for this one. So, what excites you the most about where the future lies for Saunders Brothers?
yeah, I'm excited to watch what happens going forward. With the next team going forward, that the industry's got some momentum right now. We just came out of Cultivate, and to me, it was one of the best cultivates I've been to. And maybe we say that every year that it was a great cultivate, but that everybody feels good about where we are. Is we watch the news. The world is coming to an end this afternoon or yesterday. It ended, but there's people are still buying plants. They're enjoying plants, and more so probably than ever. We thought at the end of COVID, we got the bump and everything died, but people are buying plants right now like no tomorrow. If we're creating and showing and giving them good value with good plants, and I feel good about where it is and what I'm getting ready to hand off, and or what they're getting ready to buy some from me too. Also by and I think I'm giving my children value in the company they're getting.
Sure. Okay. Keith, what about you? When you look at the future of Berns Garden Center, what excites you the most?
You know, there's so much going on in garden retail right now, with e-commerce. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. And on the landscaping side, um, it's that providing services is just such a scalable, reliable way to maintain, recurring revenues.
Mhm.
And we're in a great position. I think over the last 4 years, our residential maintenance has quadrupled, um, and we've really invested a lot in technology to be able to meet this next generation of customers where they are in terms of wanting that omni-channel kind of online experience before and to know the story of your brand before they actually come in and purchase.
Okay.
um, and then we're so good once they actually get here. We've got a really phenomenal staff who knows horticulture and they're passionate about plants. So once we get people in, we can win. And I think we've really positioned ourselves to be able to do that. And now we just have to tell the story. And we've got a really great leadership team that's able to execute against, every kind of task or challenge that we're put up against. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm really excited about, you know, I would say the biggest thing is this next generation of garden consumer. What does that look like? It's the question that everybody keeps asking, and they're really starting to show up in the marketplace now. And I think Burns is just perfectly aligned with what they want and expect out of local small family businesses that provide you know healthy, positive products like plants.
Yeah.
So,
That's
uh,
great.
can't wait to be a part of it.
Great. Karen, I'll give you the last word on this. So, what excites you the most about the future of Walter's Gardens?
No, well, thank you for having me go last. I felt like Robert and Keith probably have better answers than what I come up with. But you know, listening to like myself talk and to listening to these two people, like I'm excited for new problems.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is, you know, like reflecting back on like the whole succession planning, you talked about the same stuff over and over again for like 3 years and like nothing would happen. And like reflecting what happened 10 years ago to now it's like, okay, I have gotten a long ways and we are, developing staff. I just had a conversation about developing staff today and that like excites me instead of just like sitting with problems forever. And I agree we have a lot of oh boy, let's get this right. Tailwinds, not where you have like the benefit of tailwinds.
yeah.
I got it right. From the industry, like there has been a lot of positive where like the past couple years, it's been fine. We've been making money, but it's been very stagnant and like it's kind of a mix of some customers are doing really well and some customers are really not, and a lot of consolidation of the industry. But there's been a lot of positivity, especially in the last 6 months, about plants.
Thank you for joining us. You can learn more about this and other topics at greenhousegrower.com, and you can also follow Greenhouse Grower on LinkedIn. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, and please leave us a rating or review as it helps other listeners find the show. The Greenhouse Grower to Grower podcast is produced by the team at Meister Media Worldwide. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower.